The best of Money Matters. Right Business.
Welcome to The Right Business, where we dive deep into the stories of trailblazers who dare to disrupt the status quo, find the gap in the market to find the right business. Hello, I'm Hongbin Jeong. Now, when we talk about power, we often think about wealth, status, or influence. But what about the power to unlock opportunities for people who've been left out? That's what founder John Tan is trying to do with ErudiFi. ErudiFi is a student financing platform that's already helped tens of thousands of young people in Southeast Asia afford higher education. But can a business like this, one built around social impact, also be financially sustainable? And what does it mean to measure success, not just by returns, but by mobility? Zat Astha, editor-in-chief of The Peak Singapore, had a chance to sit down with John to find out more. And he's with us now to share more. Hi, Zat. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Zat, before we get into your profile piece with John Tan, what is ErudiFi and how is it trying to solve the problem of student loans?
Okay, so ErudiFi is an education financing platform that does something traditional banks in the region have consistently failed to do, which is extend credit to first-time, low-income students who want to pursue higher education but are typically and normally excluded from formal lending. So what makes it different is the starting point, right? ErudiFi treats these students not as risks, but as investments. For families surviving on, say, $200 a month, a university degree is often the only ticket out of generational poverty. Yet banks often reject them precisely because they lack a credit history. So ErudiFi comes in to fill in that gap and show that what is unbankable in conventional finance can actually be profitable and transformative when approached with a different lens.
Well, then how does ErudiFi disperse its funds then, Zat? How does its repayment model work?
Okay, so this is what makes it interesting and what most people don't actually realize about ErudiFi. So the loans don't go directly into the students' hands. Instead, they are channeled straight to university partners, which ensures two things, right? One is it ensures transparency. Secondly, it prevents misuse. Repayment begins while the students are still enrolled, which is a deliberate choice because it keeps the families accountable and invested in the process. Unlike consumptive lending, where borrowers may default when times get tough, repayment for education loans is tied to an outcome that most families prioritize above almost everything else, which is graduation and the opportunity to enter personal life.
Okay. I mean, student loans, they're often seen as risky or controversial in other parts of the world. So from your perspective, what makes ErudiFi's version of the model, sustainable?
Sustainability lies in understanding the nature of loan. So these are not credit lines for consumer goods or lifestyle spending, which rise and fall with economic cycles. So they are what John calls investment loans, money channeled into education, which families see as a non-negotiable. So because the loan directly enables a child to complete university, the repayment commitment is unusually strong. And the data bears this out. Default rates are actually lower than on typical consumer loans. So what appears risky in theory has actually proven to be reliable in practice.
Very interesting. I mean, I believe John spoke about the difference between consumptive loans and investment loans. How does ErudiFi use that distinction to set itself apart?
Right. So consumptive loans, such as those for maybe electronics or holidays, they are vulnerable to household and market volatility. Investment loans in education, however, are underpinned by a different kind of psychology. So families who may have never borrowed before are actually willing to sacrifice sleep, leisure, sometimes even meals to make sure the repayments are made because the alternative is watching their child drop out of university. ErudiFi sets itself apart by designing products only for this investment category and by disbursing funds directly to school, which makes the use case strictly educational.
Well, on the surface, it's a student loan company, but as you explain in your article, it's also about social mobility. How so, Zat? And why is this business especially relevant in Southeast Asia right now?
In Southeast Asia, where close to 90 million young people remain shut out of formal credit, so the barriers to education here are immense. A degree is often the single most reliable way to break cycles of poverty, but without financing, students are often forced to choose between survival and study. ErudiFi intervenes in that choice by giving them a third option. So when you multiply the experience of someone like Sheila Marie Santos, who I wrote about in the story, who spoke of exhaustion, relentless work, and despair before discovering ErudiFi, by tens of thousands, you see how financing education can become a lever for upward mobility. The relevance today for me is quite clear. In economies hungry for skilled professionals, right, enabling more young people to graduate isn't just a social good. It's actually an economic necessity.
Oh, okay. Well, Zad, when you first sat down with John, what struck you most about him as a founder? I mean, in your piece, you described him as a vanguard. Why did that label fit him?
So what I found the most interesting about John, right, is that this work that he's doing is incredibly difficult, but that is also one of the reasons why he knows it's meaningful. What struck me also was his refusal to take the easier path. See, he had previously built a company around life skills education, which is something he is deeply, deeply in love and passionate about. But then he sort of had to let it go when he realized there was no market appetite because of the way Singapore is run, right? But he could have gone into test prep after that, which he described as like selling tobacco products, lucrative but corrosive. So instead, he built ErudiFi, which is a harder, riskier business that serves people banks and investors ignore. That is why labeling him as a vanguard felt right. He represents a new kind of leadership in Southeast Asia, one that I feel sees value where others sees risks, and insists that ethics and economics don't need to be in opposition.
Well, one of the most powerful points you raise is that the very students, banks, won't lend to, first-time low-income borrowers are actually ErudiFi's best customers. And now the company has already reached nearly 60,000 students. What does that scale, tell you about demand and how big this market could actually be?
When John first told me about these 60,000 students, right, I actually had to stop him and say, do you mean 6,000? And he's like, no, I meant 60,000. And I cannot get that figure out of my head. And every time I tell someone else about it, right, they have the same reaction as me. And they ask me, do you mean 6,000? I said, no, it's 60,000.
That's amazing.
The 60,000, yeah, exactly. So the 60,000 students that ErudiFi has supported, right, if anything is actually a proof of concept, and it's not the ceiling, right? So each of these loans represents not just a borrower, but an entire family that has been mobilized around repayment because graduation changes their trajectory and changes the way they live. And if you widen the lens to the 90 million young people in Southeast Asia without access to affordable credit, you begin to see how vast the market really, really is. The demand is almost limitless. The barrier right now for John isn't appetite, it's capital.
Well, 60,000 students is a lot. And I mean, it means you've changed the lives of all these 60,000 students. But at the same time, John has said growth is limited by access to lending capital. How big of a hurdle is this for ErudiFi's future?
This hurdle, right, is such a paradox, right? It's almost existential in nature. So ErudiFi has demonstrated that its model works, that its customers repay, and that the social impact is profound. But yet the ability to expand rests on securing more capital to lend to these educational institutions and to these students, and that's where they face a structural bottleneck. Development institutions that praise the company for its work with underserved students. So you're talking about financial institutions, banks, all this, right? They praise the company for its work with underserved students, but they still decline to invest until the loan book reaches a scale, until it reaches a scale, it cannot achieve that without their backing. So this paradox, which is you're too small to fund, but too underfunded to grow, is the greatest hurdle to ErudiFi's next chapter.
Right. I mean, you mentioned development institutions calling ErudiFi too small to back. What does that reveal about the contradictions in the impact investing space?
The way I see it is that it really strikes at the heart of impact investing. So these institutions are designed, right, to support enterprises that deliver social good in emerging markets, yet they impose conditions that mirror commercial investors. Scale for them becomes the precondition for support, which truly undermines the very mission they claim to advance. ErudiFi is a case study, in this. It's a case study in how good intentions in the investment community often collapse into some sort of bureaucratic inertia, and it leaves businesses with proven models such as ErudiFi unable to access the resources they need to meet urgent demands.
Well, stepping back here, what do you think John's journey says about the bigger gap between social impact and how business still defines success?
If anything, it underscores how narrow our definition of success today still is. For many investors, success is measured in exponential growth, right? Valuations, exits, and things of that nature. But John's work reminds us that success can also be measured in the number of lives changed and the opportunities created. Look, he has built a profitable business, yes, but one that prioritizes impact over speed. That divergence between social outcome and financial metrics is the space where his story has the most to teach us.
Right. And right now, ErudiFi works in markets like the Philippines and Indonesia. Did John share whether the model could travel to other parts of Southeast Asia? I mean, if not, where do you see growth potential for ErudiFi's market expansion in the future?
So John didn't map out specifically which countries that they are intending to reach out to. The fundamentals that make ErudiFi viable, which is high tuition costs, large youth populations, low financial inclusion. This exists across the region, Vietnam, Cambodia, and even parts of Thailand. They share the similar dynamics. I suppose anywhere you find young people locked out of higher education because of financial barriers, that's where ErudiFi can travel to and can succeed. The opportunity is not confined to one or two countries. I believe it is Southeast Asia wide.
Right. Well, some great info from you there. Thank you so much, Zat, for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was Zat, Editor-in-Chief of The Peak Singapore. This has been The Right Business with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.